So, so just so it doesn't catch folks off guard, I'm gonna take a little bit of time at the beginning to contextualize the title a bit because there was some, yeah. And so after I do that, I will let Jordan take over. But I just want to like help folks understand where that title comes from. I'm not sure I'll have any. I might pose a question, but I'll lay low and see what's going on in the chat. And then if there's like some gaps, I will poke in and ask the question. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Hi, Shweta. Nice to meet you here.
Same here. I was waiting. So I want to say hello to everyone here.
Yeah.
So
okay. A suggestion, but I mean, if that's not the format, I wouldn't. Since I looked at your abstract, both abstracts, since we have somewhat different talks, even though they have something to do with one another, I'm wondering if we could have each of us give a talk and then have questions after each of the talks. Is that?
I'm good with that arrangement. So, yeah.
Are you in Delhi now? Where are you?
I'm in Vrindavan. And Professor, I have something to tell you. Like in your presentation, the most important part is that Angulimal, whose example you will be giving, is apparently belongs to the community I come from. And that's why I think that's the main point of how our talks are related, right? Because our tribes were considered barbarians, and that's the reason whole this transformation thing, reform thing is there. So I think, yeah, that's the interesting part here.
It was an interesting pairing. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you will be giving example of somebody who is registered in ancient text, but not in a good light, and maybe entire thing about him is not there where he comes from. Angulimal has a family, he has a community, right? Who dwell in the forest, and everything is the one side of the story that we see in one, mainstream religion. So it's interesting. Yeah. I'm happy to be here.
Quick question. In the recording, do you want this part of the conversation to be included on what ends up online? Or do you want it to just start when the presentations once Jordan introduces the talk and everything?
No preference.
Okay.
You have a preference?
I don't think I have a preference thing here. It's fine. It's a good conversation.
Now, Shweta, you've obviously already spoken, so people have seen your face, but I'd like to formally introduce you and read your incredible bio. So it's my pleasure to introduce Shweta Goswami, who is a PhD candidate at the Center for Philosophy. And in her work, she is using feminist phenomenology as a method to understand sexual violence and violence based on caste. And through her organization, Nirmal Initiative Trust, she's been exploring the ways to engage with the community and create space for discourse on the primary prevention of sexual violence that is focused on harm reduction and collective practice of accountability. She continues to nurture it with immense love and care. And Shweta's presentation, which is recorded for us today, so we'll be watching the pre-recording and then have the opportunity to ask her questions directly, is called Vimukta, Futurity and Abolition Praxis. So our Zoom host is now going to switch over to the recording.
Everyone, I'm Shweta Goswami. I'm a PhD candidate at Center for Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I will be reading my paper, so I may not be able to look into the camera frequently, so forgive me for that. I'm here today to share with you my understanding of abolition and my gaze into the future from where I am at present, a future which incorporates the alterity of my people, the Vimukta. I want to submit that in this presentation, I am not speaking for my people, but with them and with the ancestors whose struggle have made this possible, that I and many of my counterparts are in position to articulate the situation, make meaning, and have a voice and desire to shape the future. I will be explaining who are Vimukta people, what is their unique situation of derailment vis-a-vis society and the state, and why this unique situation screams for the ethical and radical possibilities of social change. I will then talk about Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, who offered a program of abolishing caste system by establishing foundation of new society Satyashodak, society of truth seeker, according to which truth is social, not metaphysical. I will relate a beautiful transformative movement. I tend to do that in pronunciation sometimes. That took place between Mahatma Jyotiba Phule and Dhundiba. Dhundiba came to Jyotiba Phule as an assassin, but they both ended up being counterparts, and that's the beauty I'll be talking about. I consider that movement as an example of abolition praxis. Through the example of this movement, I shall try to explain how the concept of reform is problematic. It is not only slowing down the possibilities of social change, but also maintaining the status quo. A very simple concept I shall share with you very quickly. I am using the term ethical in phenomenological sense, according to which we exist in tripartite connection with the other and the world. Imagine a triangle. The self, the other, and the world are constantly shaping each other. We exist in the world as embodied. It is through our body we relate and function in the world, and we are interrelated. Ursula K. Le Guin created a challenge for liberal theories of ethics in her story, The One Who Walked Away from Umelas. Umelas is a utopian city, prosperity and freedom of which rest on one child's misery, locked up in a windowless basement of one of the houses in the city. The child did not always live in the windowless basement. They remember sunlight and the voice of their mother. They all know it is there. All of the people of Umelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of the city, the tenderness of their friendship, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on the child's misery. If the child were brought up into the sunlight, out of that wild place, if it were clean and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done in that day and hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Amelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. The situation of Vimukta in India is no different from the child who is living in the windowless basement of Umelas. We, as a society, is made to believe that we need to have prison, to imprison some of us in order for all of us to be safe. In literal sense, Vimukta means one who is free or set free. In India, the Vimukta communities were self-governed, nomadic, semi-nomadic tribes that did not accept the caste social system. Brahmanic law book Manusmriti treated those outside the caste system as sinful, low, and barbaric because they cannot speak Sanskrit and cannot perform sacrifices. It refers to them as dasyus. This term can refer to a particular ethnic group or barbarians or simply bandits. All those tribes in this world which are excluded from the community of those born from the mouth, the arms, the thighs, and the feet of Brahma are called dasyus, whether they speak the language of the Malacha, barbarians, or that of the Aryans. According to Manu, forest tribes were naturally drawn to forbidden occupations. They are seen as external threat to Brahmanic morals and way of life. Kautilya in Arthashastra calls them thorns, since they have not chosen to live like Aryans by accepting subjecthood within the kingdom. Arthashastra, I must mention, is the most important and ancient book on economics from India. Kautilya frequently mentions a neighbor to a Brahmanic kingdom, that is, Atavika or tribal chief. Kautilya assumes that his ideal kingdom has forests, where forest tribes live with their own social and military organizations. They are often viewed as bandits who can pose a severe threat and are not easily subjugated. Kautilya attempts to co-opt these marginal groups in various ways, including the incorporation into the army. Here, the marginal is not in the sense of deprivation, but that they live on the margin of the kingdom, outside the kingdom. The Mughals and the Britishers also adopted Kautilya's scheme of co-opting the Vimuktas and branded them as enemies. After the mutiny of 1857, the British notified the Vimukta tribe a criminal by enacting the Criminal Tribes Act 1871. According to this law, criminal propensities are there in the blood. The British government built the open prison settlements for the Vimuktas. The CTA gave more power to local government to declare any tribe, section, or class of people as criminal tribe, to order registration of members of the criminal tribe and taking of their fingerprints, to direct that every such registered member would report himself at fixed intervals to the police officer of the village, report to the police officer or the headman any change in the residence, and to restrict the movement of criminal tribe member to a particular area. There were reform schools also made, where the children were taken away from the families, so that, with this belief that the children wouldn't become criminal. In 1952, the Vimuktas were denotified after India got independence in 1947. However, the law still governs them with Habitual Offenders Act 1952, according to which Vimuktas are no more to be defined as criminal by blood. You cannot change that. But to be defined as criminal by habit, discipline can change learned behavior. The practice of criminalization and surveillance continue till today. One must here again think about the idea of political prisoners, since the Indian National Congress organized a voluntary mass arrest movement, Jail Bharo Andolan, in the quest of freedom from the British rule, while ignoring and to some extent legitimizing the political criminalization and incarceration of Vimukta communities, which are over 220 in number. We need to question the binary of legitimate incarceration and illegitimate incarceration. Vimukta is free were treated as a threat. Vimukta in the latter sense, set free, is ambiguous. Thinking of the body as an expression of individual's relationship to the world, which world do Vimuktas belong to on being set free? The social world Vimukta ancestors inhabited does not exist. What exists are settlements for forced labor, police brutality, custodial death, custodial rape, and systemic erasure. There's a personal systemic erasure in that is close to my heart, is that the city design does not have burial ground for Vimuktas. Traditionally, Vimuktas, the nomadic tribes, used to bury their ancestors and not cremate them. However, the city design does not acknowledge that. So, for me, my 4 generations, I'm sorry, how to say that, the four generations of my ancestors have been cremated. Now, even if I desire and if I can afford a burial, I don't know which part of the land I should be buried in, because it's only the 5th generation, in the back, how to say that. Okay, I should continue. Most academic work is either romanticizing or the carefree lifestyle of the Vimuktas, or it is constructing a narrative of its unmountable suffering and victimhood which needs evangelical saving. I would like to share the recent incidents of violence inflicted on Vimuktas, incidents which got national media coverage. In January 2017, over 20 policemen from 13 police stations raided two villages, Ramanda and Bhutia, in Dhar district, Madhya Pradesh. While the villagers are familiar with the raid, what came as a shock was that the police actually assaulted four women during the raid. According to the news report, though no one was arrested, cops seized several motorcycles and goods suspecting them to be stolen. Dhar SP Superintendent of Police Birendra Singh said the population of these villages is around 500 each, but at present there are 175 pending permanent warrants and 145 wanted criminals who have been charged. July 2018, in Dhule district of Maharashtra, over 200 people mobilized to lynch 5 individuals belonging to Nath Menthe Dabari Goswami community. These 5 men apparently were on their way to register their presence at the local panchayat office and were carrying their identity card as well. The mob believed that the 5 men were kidnappers. January 2021, I'm quoting the New Indian Express. In the brazen case of mass kidnapping, a group of over 100 people belonging to Madhya Pradesh abducted 38 women and children of Kanjar tribe from Rajasthan on suspicion that Kanjar men were involved in stealing their bikes. I would encourage the audience to imagine social justice for Vimukta, considering the above mentioned cases where the Vimuktas are facing violence from the society and also the state. Envisioning abolition from Jyotiba's legacy. This portion is a bit mellow and it becomes philosophical. In his book Sarvajanik Satadharma, Jyotiba evaluates truth in terms of social, which is collective well-being. He says, our Creator has graciously bestowed all human rights on all men and women without any distinction. No particular man or a group, gang of men has any right to oppress any human being. Those who do not so oppress their fellow beings should be designated as the votaries or followers of the truth. The abolitionist Jyotiba Phule and his partner Savitribai Phule opened formal schools for the girls belonging to Shudra, Dalit and Vimukta communities in 1848. These communities were barred from learning by the Vedic injunctions. There are a lot of life-affirming abolition work that the couple did together to mention here. Jyotiba and his wife Savitri were gaining reputation among the oppressed masses. Masses were gaining new consciousness about their freedom through education. This threatened the ruling Brahmin class. In 1856, Brahmins hired an assassin belonging to Ramoshi community, a Vimukta community. His name was Dhundiba Rode. Dhundiba, along with his friend, went to kill Jyotiba. However, in this moment of attack and defense, a conversation took place between the assassins and Mahatma Jyotiba. We don't know what exactly the conversation was. It is a public knowledge that Jyotiba told the assassins about the work he is doing for the communities, and the assassin found their work important to such an extent that they chose to become Jyotiba's bodyguard. The transformative effect was such that Savitribai Rode, daughter-in-law of Dhundiba Rode, the assassin, joined Phule's mission and went on to organize 9 conferences on education between the year 1919 to 1925. I consider this movement as abolition praxis because both Mahatma Jyotiba and Dhundiba opened towards each other as equal. They allowed vulnerability, which is a human condition, to themselves and to each other. Either of them are not assuming undue worth. What happened in this moment is not a reform but transformation. It is not a one-way road. Reform assumed that the stakeholder involved does not have any active agency. In reform, individuals, communities are to be acted upon and not acted with. The concept of reform does not recognize the ambiguous nature of reciprocity within intersubjective existence. Simone de Beauvoir elucidates the concept of ambiguous reciprocity in her work. According to her, as conscious beings, others, and both subjects and objects, as conscious being, others are both subjects and objects for an individual, And just as an individual is both a subject and object for herself, she is also a subject and object for others. In this ambiguous situation, Boer places her concept of reciprocity. That is, one's condition is structured by relation of reciprocity with the world outside her, social and material, and one's own body. Because of the ambiguous reciprocity as meaning-giving subject, one's freedom is vulnerable to the influence of the interpersonal relations and the social institution that form part of one's situation. In talking about oppression, Boer explains that the situation can be almost impossible to come out of because it is structured in such a way that they repress individuals' will to act. Human beings do not submit to natural calamities. They face calamities and rebuild what calamities destroy. But with fellow human beings, there is a constant engagement. According to Boer, since we are social beings, we are always interdependent, and it is due to this interdependence that the oppression becomes a possibility. And since the interdependence is vital to our existence in the world, the oppression it leads to is always despicable. Boer explains how the denial of freedom takes place. An individual's freedom requires a non-restricted future in order to fulfill itself. The other fellow human beings, given their interdependence, define an individual's future, since they too are moving towards freedom and creating concrete realities. There are discoveries, formations, and practice of culture, industrialization. This kind of constructive movement opens possibilities for human beings reciprocally. But if this reciprocity gets hindered by fellow human beings, if they simply deny participation to an individual or community, they deliberately cut them off from the future projects and possibilities and reduce an individual or a community to a thing. Now, I would like to take you back to Milas, and think if we should give a fruit to the undernourished child in a form of reform and feel good about ourselves, or shall we be willing to prepare ourselves to survive the chaos that may come if we bring the child out? Just as Octavia Butler has told us, we can prepare ourselves for the future, or we can be thrown into it. We can hold each other tightly, lovingly in faith, and bring the child out in the sun. Let them be with their families and ancestors. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us back to live, Shweta. So I know that we're slightly over time, but I think it's really important that you have your 5 minutes for questions. So would anyone like to ask a question? Or Shweta, if you would like to add anything to the recording that we've just listened to, you go for it.
I just want to change the figures because I think in the print, I just read it as it is. So it was the attack, it was over 200 police officers attacked one village of 500, which is 500 population, right? And that's what I wanted to change. And also the mob that attacked Vimuktas from my community, which is specifically Nath, that I come from, within 220 communities. So it was over 2,000 people who mobilized to kill 5 unarmed men. Yeah. And also, I would have loved to talk more about Octavia Butler while talking about abolition, but unfortunately, because of my training and in philosophy, which is again, we get trained in philosophy through, again, the white supremacist structure of philosophy. That's what I had right now. But I think and Beauvoir's Simone de Beauvoir's work is important, so certainly that's there. But I think I would have loved to talk more about how the vision of Octavia Butler abolition, especially because right now when we talk about abolition, you cannot ask as concrete questions. It's going to be chaotic. But what is important is to hold on to each other and especially support, and not support, I think, have faith in the communities, African Americans and other groups that have been marginalized, systemically marginalized, because they have the power, they have survived it till now, and they have the power to shape the future. So maybe it's time to listen. And yeah, that's what I would say.
There's a couple of comments that you might like to read, because we'll obviously pass on all the chat stuff to you. One of them from Michael is thanking you for sharing with us about the Vimukta communities, and that he agrees with your conclusion that this makes a great location for abolitionist praxis.
Okay.
More of a comment than a question, but very useful nonetheless. And there's another interesting comment there, but there's 2 more minutes before we absolutely have to close the discussion. Shweta, was there anything else that you wanted to say or contribute?
This is great. I'm really thankful to all the organizers for doing this labor to bring all of us together and for creating this space. Thank you so much.
Well, I guess I do think that there needs to be a little bit of a intervention at this particular point, and I think we have a little bit of leeway. What have you, in your research, right, as you're quoting sort of, I guess, people who are Black or of African descent throughout your work, have you noticed any structural differences in the way that the Vimukta community is positioned, whereas it's different from how people of Black African descent are positioned? So this is more so, I understand that the pain of incarceration is a pain that a lot of people feel, but at the structural level, have you noticed some distinctions between how the state deploys violence against the Vimukta community and the way the state deploys violence against Black and African people around the world? Does my question make sense? But it's more, yeah.
I think it does. What I understood is you're asking that the state intervention, how is it different? How a state is acting over Vimuktas and how it is acting on African Americans. But what in my understand, I think I wouldn't say how. See, the state in India is a Brahminical state, and it has a history which goes on like back to, as they say, that it is Vedic, and that the caste system is made by the god, and the Vedas are infallible. So the structure that anybody who is outside the Varna system is barbarian. So it's a different thing from how white supremacist delusion is working through the state. So I wouldn't want to make a comparison, because I think this is the time we really call out the nuances of difference. And I think, yeah, that's very important, and that would show how the state is acting in various ways, in dominant ways, and there are dominant structures, and how they're alive, like justifying I think, yeah, because you see, as Professor had mentioned, Kant, we have been only reading about Kant in philosophy, but he was racist. His work is, I wouldn't want to quote, I mean, I don't remember exact work, but how he's talking about Africans, Asians. So, yeah, and our liberal state, Indian liberal state, all the theories are about liberal justice theories are around white supremacists. So yeah, there's, of course, it is global because of the colonization that happened to India. But see, the Indian state is not only colonial, but also Brahmanic. So we really need to read that nature. Yeah, that's what I would say. And yeah,
I guess my follow-up question, and I will cut it short, is how do you define co-optation, and what are some of the tools that you use as you're reading through Black text and African text to make sure that the way you're interpreting it, or the lessons you're taking from it, are not necessarily a form of co-optation? And then I'll stop there.
Okay. So I hope I have got it correct. So I will just repeat what I have understood, that you're asking me how, when we are reading, even I as a Vimukta reading African American work, it's very important that I quote it and begin from that. Yeah. So also I wanted to mention, thank you for this. This question is very important. I talked about Mahatma Jyotiba Phule. So when he wrote a book in 1849, and it's called Slavery, and he dedicates it to the struggle of African Americans against slavery. So abolition of slavery. So yeah, I think it's very important. There's a legacy, and people around the world, the marginalized especially, are learning from each other, and that learning we need to really quote, as I said, that even in my talk, I'm talking about Octavia Butler at the end, but I think her work would have been, it's, the more space would have been about her work along with Jyotiba Phule, but because I needed to talk about the structure, like the philosophy part of it. So yeah, I think it's very important that we keep on talking and keep on saying whose work we are learning from, so that yeah, if there is a less co-option thing, wouldn't we can at least be actively conscious and mention that co-option doesn't take place, at least preventive.
All right, thank you
Does it
so
make
much.
sense?
Yeah, no, that
Was
was
it
it.
helpful?
That was really helpful, and I'm sure that
Sharon?
this conversation could go on. Sharon, Shirley, are you happy with?
Oh, it's not about, thank you for even just answering. That's amazing already. So thank you so much.
Okay.
And of course, if anybody has any follow-up questions that they would like us to pass on to any participant in the whole conference, we'll have the opportunity for further kind of interaction on our website and things later. So feel free to email us or put it in the chat. But for now, we're coming up against the next session, so it's very important that we close this session. So thank you very much to Ryan and Sharon, Cheryl, and to our presenters for today. We will hopefully see a lot of you at the conference critique session, which is coming up very shortly. Thank you, everybody.